to get to know folks here in the room. We just finished up 2 days of training with our new program. I'll talk about that later today, but it's great because I got to know a lot of the faces, a lot of the folks here in the room. And then we get a lot of folks that have come in from the States and other places. So wonderful to have you all here. So just a few words before we get started. I think most of you know the FAIR Institute, but one of the things I'm really excited about is the growth that we continue to see. So we just went over the 17,000 member mark as of like 2 weeks ago. So very recently went over that. So the growth continues at a really nice pace, and I think that's always indicative. But I think to me the more exciting thing is just what we're doing in terms of impacting the jobs that you do, impacting the risk of organizations and businesses that are obviously facing, a very, very dynamic risk environment. We'll talk obviously a lot about that. So the impact, I think, the quote from SC Media that was from a couple years back, very telling about the impact that the FAIR Institute has. And I'm always just amazed at where I hear FAIR is being practiced. We hear about it, being like Lee at NCSC has been, using FAIR and talking to the folks that they work with on it. I heard somebody from UPenn, actually, I think it was Zach, who's one of our speakers today, and I'm looking around, but he was like, yeah, I learned about it at Penn State, and it just places that we aren't even directly working with that are adopting FAIR, which is just phenomenal. So having wonderful success. We couldn't do this without Safe Security. So Safe, as most of you know, is the founder and technical advisor of the FAIR Institute. So we do a lot of work with Safe's team, and they contribute a lot to the mission that we have, and we're very thankful for that. We're also very thankful for a wonderful set of partners, advisors, folks that lend not only financial sponsorship, but just time and talent. We've got a lot of folks here in the room. We've got a few folks from EY you'll hear from later. CRIS, Tom and Christoph do just an enormous amount for us. On the right, you've got Ostrich. Ostrich, is very involved in the work that we do. Greg is here today. So we couldn't do it without that kind of support and support that goes beyond that. And then we work with a few association partners. One I'm excited about just because I spent 11 years of my career at the TBM Council focused on driving really standards and education for CIOs and CFOs around the value and consumption of technology. And there's a lot that we're starting to look at together and how we can help manage and really create the balance and the trade-offs between cost of cybersecurity and value for it. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to introduce Nick Sanna, who's the founder and president of the FAIR Institute. So Nick, come on up. And Nick's going to say a few words, and then he's going to moderate our first panel today.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Take the clicker. So good morning, everybody. It's great to be in London and meet a lot of friendly faces I've recently seen on Zoom. Meet you in person. If you hadn't say hello, we'll get the chance to meet during one of the breaks. But what we're going to talk about today, the entire day, is going to be basically reflecting on some of the mission that the business people, the business audience in our companies wants to assign to us, which is basically help us manage cyber risk at the speed of the business, because they have a mission to do. They need to grow their business, move forward with the digital growth initiatives, implement AI, and continue with mergers and acquisitions. But as they make those big business decisions, they need our help to make sure that they make risk-informed decisions. The reality is right now, that is not fully happening. Oftentimes the business is going ahead, pursuing their goals with little consideration of risk, because we as a profession oftentimes don't have the data that is useful for them and is actionable to them, or the data comes too late, once the decision is already made, and we are there just to prevent further damage from happening. And so we're going to reflect on that today, and hopefully we'll get inspired by a lot of the companies who are at various phases in their journey to build the highly effective risk management programs, and you can bring some of those recipes and tidbits back to your own company. So I'm going to start with something that might be obvious in this room, but it's not obvious in the wider business world, and the fact that cyber risk is really a strategic business risk. And the World Economic Forum, the latest report this year, said cyber now has risen to the #2 strategic enterprise risk right after climate-induced risks. And we say climate-induced risk, we're thinking about hurricane hitting Florida and bringing a bunch of businesses down and wreaking havoc in the housing market and the insurance market. And those are billions in one shot, et cetera. But cyber risk is not far behind. You know, Cybersecurity Ventures is estimating that this year, the financial impact of cyber incidents will be $10 trillion. That's equal to the GDP of Germany, France, and the UK combined. That's how big it has become. And that's up from 3 trillion just 7 years ago. So as you know, this continues to be, and this includes, by the way, of course, damages related to business interruption. Every day you hear about a company that you know that is being, under attack from ransomware. They may be idle or losing the data. They may be under regulatory pressure of fines because they lost a bunch of consumer data. They may have privacy liability. They may have their IP stolen, and suddenly a product from another country is showing up in the market with exactly the same specifics and taking market share from you. That is all included in that figure. So if cyber risk is a business risk, are we treating it as such in our organization? And unfortunately, the answer is no, because we are managing that risk still as just technical compliance. And when I speak to CISOs, like, how do you make decisions on what to prioritize? And they typically tell me the story. The story that is most frequent is, I abide to a certain framework. Typically, it's a controls framework. And they say, we go down the list and trying to mature the best we can along those lines. So I have my shopping list, and we need to buy one of everything, and we need to implement all those processes. And if we implement using this CSF, we're trying to go from a 1 to a 4, and that's our journey. And we're like, how do you prioritize? Well, that's a good question. And so, and when I asked them, how much time do you spend doing that? Well, that's consuming 60 to 70% of our time doing this. And it's like, how about actually managing risk? Well, we hope that as part of our efforts, we're going to see some risk reduction, but we cannot put our hands on it. And so, so how well is this working? What is the effect on those losses? Well, obviously, if we went from 3 trillion to 10 trillion, in losses in the last 6, 7 years, obviously it's not working. And so the compliance approach we were told would take care of our issues is not working. I think in many cases it should be treated like a set of best practices that should inspire you to adopt better practice in the context of risk, but it's not treated that way. And when companies are actually dealing with risk, their risk assessment practices are very, I would say, limited. We see a lot of still, it's unfortunate, in 2025, wet finger in the air, high, medium, low, yet, yellow, green. I see major banks, the biggest banks in the world, with these enormous, heat maps and spreadsheets, yet, yellow, greens. And I was with a bank, top 3 bank in the States. They spent 6 months doing the risk assessments. They complete it, they show it to the regulators. How many decisions they make off it? 0, because nobody in the business is taking that seriously. And so how much waste? In the meanwhile, what's happening on the other side? On the meanwhile, the economics of cyber risks for the threat actors are getting easier. The barrier of entry for threat actors to wreak havoc is going lower. With AI now, the price of, products that allow you to, kick off ransomware attacks is going down. If you go on the dark web, you have now this amazing website that give you all kinds of strains of ransomware you can personalize at lower cost with results guaranteed. They know the ROI. They're ready to make a commitment that if you don't get these kind of proceeds, we're going to reimburse the money. The economics for them is certain. They know exactly what the ROI they're going to get if they launch X many attacks, because they're going to penetrate in X many networks and get away with money and a bunch of ransom. On the flip side, on the cybersecurity side, what we're asking is like, what is the ROI? When you ask your companies, like, what is the ROI of cybersecurity? The answer is not so certain, still. What is the value we're providing, to the business? And in terms of reducing the actual risk? That is still a very difficult question to answer. And the reason why the FAIR Institute is in existence to help address the problem, to change the equation, to start changing the economics, where the economics right now is fully shifted towards the threat actors, making it very easy to wreak havoc, and very difficult for us to understand what matters most. Where do we need to pile up our resources to defend ourselves versus what we're doing today, spreading ourselves super thin. The threat actors love it that we spread ourselves too thin on controls frameworks, keep busy going after compliance, and instead of focusing where it matters most, because we don't have the means to determine what matters most. So we're going to reflect over the course of the day about how do we change the equation and how can we collaborate, because at the FAIR Institute, the goal here is to advance the journey together, because it will take a village. It takes a village from practitioners, academics, service providers, vendors to collaborate to make sure that we change the equation and suddenly can have a material impact in treating this as an economic problem, as a business problem versus just a technical problem. So I want to talk now a little bit about the work we've done at the FAIR Institute, because we made a lot of progress over the years. I've shown this at the FAIR conference in DC in November. I want to show it again just because for many people who have been familiar with it, it gives you an idea of the work we have done and how we are attempting to support the industry. We started in 2016, where I remember at that time when I was meeting with a bunch of CISOs, they were telling me assessing risk in a way the business understands all of a sudden cannot be done. We're a special snowflake. The environment on the cyber side is too dynamic, the threat environment is too dynamic, our controls are going to say we don't have enough metrics and we don't have enough data, and we cannot possibly, assess risk. And the alternative is, how do you manage that? How do you prioritize? I have experience. We use gut. Okay, that was 2016. And what we did at that time, we started the FAIR Institute to show them, no, there is a model. At that time, the original FAIR model had been published. The early pioneers, I don't see any pioneers from those days in the room, but the early pioneers are starting applying it and starting getting good feedback from the business saying, oh, we're doing it all wrong. We're focusing on some areas where there's little risk because of this so-called experience, because we got incidents there before, but we're not watching here when new emerging risks are happening, and they didn't have a scientific way of doing it. And so the first model is going to say emerged off FAIR, and we answered the question how much risk we have. And so we started the conference basically saying, let's put on stage people actually doing it and show the world it can be done. And sometimes also invite the critics, come here and debate it and see that actually we can do this. In 2010, we also advanced the discourse by basically saying, how do we apply this? Because cyber risk quantification, as much as I love the term, because I coined it at the beginning, it used to be information risk analysis, something very complicated. It's a means to an end. What can we use it for? What kind of decisions can we inform? Okay? And at the beginning it was like, oh, it can help us, one, assess risk in a way the business understands. It can help us assess the ROI of certain security architectures and compare among themselves and see which tactic and technique on the security side gives us a better bang for the buck. With some companies saying, well, I can use it to assess also the risk associated with impending M&A. And so we're starting seeing this can be used in informing a lot of decisions where decision is still wet finger in the air and the business is moving ahead without intelligence. 2019, okay, we're getting our first win. So at FairCon in 2019, we had people saying we're doing this, and then they're realizing, how do we scale? This started with nice models with Fair, spreadsheet, the first SaaS products out there. It was tough to scale. It's like, how do we scale this? And so strategies to build programs, not just doing single analysis. We shared at a conference. I remember that it was right before COVID, very successful conference in DC. And then 2021 was a big milestone. I think a step function in the progress in the industry, because until then, doing fair analysis required a lot of interpretation by analysts, looking at controls, looking at threat environment, and then doing some manual brain exercise to interpret the values and plug it in the product, a very manual exercise. What happened during COVID, the original inventor of FAIR, Jack Jones, had time to think. He was no longer on the road speaking at conferences, and he had time to think. One of the most untreatable problems is, how do controls work together? How do controls impact risk? Not just singularly, but also as a system. Because if you have upstream controls that take care of all certain problems, we don't need as much downstream controls. And how do they interact? How does it work? And he figured it out. He figured out what is the model by which we can really measure control effectiveness as a system and as it relates to risk, which was the key to automation. Without it, we couldn't possibly think about automating and measuring control effectiveness. And last year, we wanted to answer a new question yet again. Regulators in the States and now in Europe and the UK are asking companies to start disclosing incidents and the materiality of those incidents. And people came out of the FAIR Institute and saying, materiality, amount of impact, how do you do that? Is there a model? How do we break down losses like a CFO or an insurance company would? Again, at the FAIR Institute, we put a team together. We came up with a model that it breaks down forms of losses like a CFO and insurance company would, and we made it available, the taxonomy to the industry, and it's now part of the body of knowledge of FAIR. And now we're basically talking about automation, and I will not steal the thunder from Todd, who's going to speak about the latest advances on the thing, but it's like, how can we put FAIR and automation in the same sentence? Because our business owners, they got an appetite of the benefits they can get out of FAIR-based analysis. They can make decisions that are grounded in dollars and cents or euros or pounds, and they're asking a bunch of you for more. I'm launching a new product. What's the right architecture? Oh, we're struggling with prioritizing our findings on vulnerabilities. Which one can we do? And we need to do it in real time because we're getting 60 findings every day, but we're on the team to fix 15 a day, so which one come first? Or, we are merging these two businesses or moving to this cloud. Or the latest is we want to adopt this type of AI to automate a bunch of stuff in our call centers. And they're asking us, can you give me an answer? But they expect an answer quickly because the business doesn't want to wait. The latest thing in there is third parties. We want to onboard a new SaaS vendor, a new AI vendor, et cetera. Can you tell me if we are safe or not? They don't want to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for the risk assessment to come back because they want to make a decision this week. We are negotiating the contract. So how do we operate and provide answers at the speed of the business? And we're going to speak about strategies to do that throughout the conference. So that's the progress, and I'm proud to say I think that together as a community, we have really made this possible and advanced the profession in very fundamental ways. So now, no longer a pipe dream to say we can manage risk at the speed of the business. And again, we talked about the business drivers already. What are business drivers to that? Regulations are playing now a big role. It's interesting to note, I'm going to focus here on some of the European regulations and the UK regulation coming out. NIS2 and DORA put a very heavy emphasis on improving your risk management practices and actually think about cybersecurity from the risk and resilience perspective, and which is a new thing. And it's funny when you look at it, they also sprinkle in there, we need to do this continuously. They're basically saying doing one-time risk assessment a year when the threats are changing every week doesn't make any sense. We have an imbalance there. Talking about the equation of economics. The threat actors don't stop. They're moving and they're evolving the text every day. Can we laugh off the data coming from a risk assessment we done 8 months ago? It doesn't work. And so the regulators are starting to basically point in the direction, say you need to start thinking, implementing strategy to allow you to do that. And so it's not only the business that wants to move fast, the regulators say you got to adjust and give yourselves the means. Otherwise, you're going to have a big problem in terms of resilience and support of your business. So we already talked about about some of the FAIR enables. I'm going to skip on this because already, and I want to now ground it in basically in the experience of real practitioners here. So I want to here invite the panelists listed here on stage So Neil, Pierre, and Matt, why don't you come on stage, and let's continue the discussion in the context of your own businesses. So let's welcome them. So, do you mind taking this off for the cameras? Yeah, take it out, yeah. And here we are. Pierre, good. Tu peux enlever ton badge pour la caméra? Yeah. Okay, while we're getting mic'd, I'm going to ask Luke. Luke, can you give me a phone, because I have my questions that have been prepared in there. And so I want to ask you to maybe introduce yourselves in terms of tell us what your company does and what your role is. Why don't we start with you, Matt?
Yep. Thanks, Nick. So my name is Matt Burns. I'm the Technology and Security Risk Specialist Director at Lloyds Banking Group. And the group's all about helping Britain prosper. We provide a range of financial services. And I work into the CISO, the CTO, and the head of non-financial risk. And my team is all about driving informed risk decision-making at pace.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Cool. My name is Neil Davis. I'm the Director of Cyber Risk at Maersk. Maersk is a global shipping and logistics company. You might have seen our containers going past you on the railway or on the roads. And if you look around the room today, you'll probably find pretty much everything in this room has been in one of our containers at some point in its life. So we affect trade all around the world. I report into the CISO and up through the CTIO at Maersk. And we also have an enterprise risk reporting role to play, but effectively the same as yours, trying to enable decision-making. We're not quite like a bank. We don't have as much money, so we have to be really careful about where we spend our money and what we spend it on, so we need to be sure we're making the right decisions.
And so my name is Pierre Olodo. I'm a cyber risk manager. I work in a Swiss luxury group called Richemont. We are manufacturing watches, jewels, and some fashion accessories as well.
Yeah, tell us some of the brands, because if they know the brands, I think more.
Yeah, we do have, could be Van Cleef & Arpels. We have Cartier in terms of jewelry, and watchmaking would be IWC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, or this kind of brands. So my main goal in the company is to identify the cyber risks occurring across our business processes, our value of chain, and to work closely with the first line of defense to make sure that the level of cyber risk we have is managed and is aligned with the risk appetite of the group.
Wonderful. So it's great to see a very disparate industry. You have manufacturing, retail, logistics, and banking. He says he's the poor guy here. They have less money than probably the luxury conglomerate and the bank. And so interesting to see maybe, because he needs to prioritize too how he does it. Probably, I think need helps also with creativity, and I think you'll appreciate that. So the first question I want to ask them is what has been the driving force, and you are at different stages of adoption. Some of you have been on the journey, some of you are starting on the journey. But what has been the driver for building a more mature cyber risk management program and move from what we talked earlier, from a compliance to a risk-based approach to cyber risk?
Maybe I can start that one, if that's all right. So I think, financial service institutions are quite compliance-driven by nature from a regulation perspective. And Basel was the framework that most organizations use to build their enterprise risk management frameworks. But of late, we're changing that. We're looking at risk-based approach, which follows the bow tie method, which is very similar to what FAIR used. And that's to take us from a compliance mindset towards a threat-led approach to managing risk. And it's more thinking about the real-time data that we can use to drive informed risk decision-making. And we need to lay the foundations for that, and that's all about the right taxonomy, the right controls, and then getting the good data models into our systems that sort of produce the risk assessment. So we're starting there, and
Yeah, but let me tell you, so why you want to go away from Basel? For many people who are in the banking industry, that's a provocative thing.
Yeah.
What is driving this? So who said we're going to do things differently, and why?
Yeah, I think if you look at compliance, it's sort of quite, I'm not going to say one size fits all, but it's not looking at the causes that drive the impact to the business products. It's not to say that we don't care about compliance, but I think we start there. What are the scenarios that can affect our customers? And then we apply that context, and then we apply the controls, and then I think you get compliance as a byproduct.
Wonderful. Thank you. Neil, how about you guys, at Maersk?
So at Maersk, many of you know we had a major incident in 2017, and prior to that we were a very compliance-driven organization, and that incident sort of jolted us to realize, it didn't work. To your point, we still need to be compliant in certain areas, and we need to follow the frameworks and do our best and get mature in areas that we can do. But really it's that immediate threat. What's going to happen today, tomorrow, next week that we need to focus our efforts on, and that was really what drew us into a risk-based conversation, as well as the same challenges that every business has around cost and funding. Where can we put that money? Like you were talking earlier, Nick, around spreading ourselves too thin. Instead of spreading very thin, let's put thicker bits of controls in certain areas where we believe from a risk-based approach is more effective.
Thank you.
Great. So I have maybe just one slide that I prepared,
Yes.
if you could, just to show where we are. So we started in 2020 with two kind of proof of concepts projects. The first one was the move to cloud of a very critical business application for us. So what amount of risk did we have back in the time if we moved to the cloud, this critical app? The second one was an M&A project from the group who was acquiring a new brand back in the time, and the integration of this new brand to our infrastructure and the controls that we should implement beforehand or afterwards. So that was the question, should we do it, yes or no? We used it for that purpose. Since then we had various use cases to support our business, and we'll discuss about that afterwards. And then we defined a roadmap to be able to cover all of our entities, our maisons, our brands, to measure the risk. And since 2 years, nearly, we are able to present the results to the executives of the maisons. So this is where we started and where we are now. And we have not a dream, but we know we will get there somehow. But we don't know exactly when, but to have a fully automated process to measure our cyber risks.
Yeah, wonderful. I remember I was involved in one of their projects, and they started with M&A, and I remember that the question that the business had at Richmond was, we're struggling to convince the CEOs of the maison, these luxury, companies, to invest in cybersecurity, because they had higher standards at Richmond at a mothership than these entities that usually are great artisans, of luxury goods, but not security specialists. And I remember the first time we translated the findings of a risk assessment in dollars and cents, one of the CEOs like, oh, I had no idea that things like ransomware can cost me this much money, so this invests in me of complying. If it reduces this much, it makes sense. The ROI is clear, let's do it. It was really a watershed moment. And so really, it was great to see that there was a, at the beginning of your journey, and then hopefully that kind of success mushroomed. Also, I want to highlight also what he said is like, don't let a crisis, don't waste a crisis. Great catalyst for change. You get the attention of your business where you need to do things different. It's a great moment to basically propose change, and don't miss those opportunities, And yes.
Maybe I wanted to add one more point. I think we're looking at scenarios that have happened, but actually most organizations now are thinking about the customer's needs and what do we need to do to move forward and give them what they need. So we've got to work at pace. And how do we do that? As you said, you need to make decisions, you need to make them quickly, and when you're around the table producing a new product or a new feature release, if you're working on stale data that's old, it's quite difficult to get the confidence to go fast. So I think this initiative here is all about getting the right information to those decision makers as well. So I'd say that's probably the second reason why we want to go on this approach.
Absolutely. And so I remember, just to put some color on this, the last thing, I remember I was talking to say your CISO, and he was telling me at some point, it's like, hey, listen, we're competing with non-banking financial technology companies, and we need to move fast. If I deploy my compliance, book, it takes me 18 months to build my security strategy. They want an answer from me in 5 weeks, and the only thing I can do is assess what is the top risk, focus on that, and know I'm done the best I could. And so that's really what we're talking about, being proactive there and working at the speed of the business. So thank you, guys. So second question I want to ask you here is like, what is kind of business decision, make it real now. So what kind of questions are being asked to, are being asked to answer? What kind of business decision are you trying to empower, that is maybe new in the last couple of years they didn't get before, that now you're being asked to, or to provide as a data for.
I mean, I don't mind going first on that. I think for me, Nick, there's sort of 3 levels of this. You've got the strategic, which is the new market or a new product you want to launch for a customer. And it's what in that is obviously good for the customer, the opportunity there, but what are the threats to the customer as well? Before you venture into that and invest a lot of capital, is that the right thing to do? The second thing is the tactical elements of it. So we've all got product teams that develop services. When they're releasing a new specific feature, how are we getting around that to make sure that we're not creating a specific exposure that can be exploited by a threat actor? And we tend to use threat modeling to go and look at that particular activity and make sure that the architecture is aligned with that. And then obviously it's the day-to-day. Attacks happen every single second. You need to formulate the right response to that, and it's quite dynamic, right, and it changes. And actually, some of these tools, if we can gather the right data from our environment and our third parties, which are increasingly attacked, we just take the right approach in responding to that. So I'd say they're sort of the key levels of trying to respond to this. I think in organizations, the risk teams and the operations teams, they tend to sit in different parts of the organization, right? So I think what we'd like to try and do, which is still some work, is integrate all that data together, so we're doing it as one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, on the strategic front, we get, I suppose, the broad brush questions, the topic of the day that the CEO's read about or something. What's the risk from AI? How do you scope that? But, FAIR gives us a methodology where we can quite quickly give some numbers and go, well, let's talk about it. It might not be precise, but it's accurate, right? So we can say, well, this is the sort of range you're looking at. Do you want us to spend more time and effort on this? Let's scope it around. How will it affect the organization differently? To also looking at, if you think of our estate in Maersk, which is quite vast, take our warehousing business, we've got over 700 warehouses around the globe. Our standards or compliance might say you need to have redundant firewalls in each warehouse, and they're like, really? Firewalls 10 grand each, and times that by 2, times it by 700. Can I spend that money elsewhere? But that warehouse only makes a margin of 0.5% or 1%. So we can then bring in some methodology that says, well, actually, yeah, let's look at it. Maybe there are some regions, countries, locations that don't make much money that we can have lower security at with some other controls in place.
Wonderful. How about you?
Yeah, so I agree with what was said. I think there are multiple levels here. At least for us, there are at least 2 levels. The strategic one, I said before, if you have a global perspective on your risk register, it can help you to define where you should spend your money for the next fiscal year. That's one thing. Should I spend it on the business continuity, operating technology security, different stuff, because we do have a lot of processes and they are all different. The second use case that we see often those days is about if you have large transformation programs and with a defined budget that you cannot, you can spend more. We support them in identifying the controls which are the most critical in regards to the very specific risk scenarios related to their program. Like the old way of doing that was taking the NIST CSF list or the CISF Board 1 and say, look, you need to do everything. The answer we can provide now is, okay, this is your program. Those are the top 3 risk scenarios that might happen, right? Those are the top tier controls you must implement before go live. This is non-negotiable. And for the rest of it, this is the exposure we have, right? And then you take the decision because you're the business and obviously it's your decision.
I love it. I love it because all 3 are talking about challenging the old compliance mindset and helping the company focus on what matters. This leads me to something, it's not in the script here, so I'm going to warn the panelists here. But since we're also in the UK and this model is very much in vogue in many regulated entities, more and more I'm hearing the 3 lines of defense model being challenged. As if this, what started as an organizational construct, turn into risk management practices, that are done by different people with different models. Is this discussion happening? Are you seeing this being ineffective as a model? Are you having those discussions freely internal, or are you the change maker that is eager to have the discussion? Where are you guys in that?
Yeah, I suppose it directly applies to financial services. It was probably born there in a way. I think we always need some form of independent validation of the risks that the business is taking and the controls to make sure they're effective. But I think that model sometimes inhibits pace. So what can we do to make sure it's optimized? And I think we need to be looking at the same data set, and that's not always the case. And we need to agree what a risk is and what a control is and what appetite is or what tolerance is. So for me, I feel like this particular endeavor is really going to sort of stress the three lines of defense model and try and make it as optimal as possible. And that's actually part of our strategy, is trying to integrate those three teams effectively around the same story.
Absolutely. I think to me it feels like, we are in the pursuit of the truth, the single truth about the state of the threats, the state of our controls, and then there are different roles. People need to assess what the top risks are. People need to assess what are the right operational methods to address those risks, and somebody has to audit, are you doing what you're supposed to do? But there's got to be a single source of truth
100%.
versus three different truths with different methods. That is almost impossible to reconcile, correct?
Yeah, and I think if you're a board member and you get three versions of the same story, that's really difficult to be able to make decisions, and you want it to be everyone in the same space, unless there's a really good constructive challenge, and that's okay. Yeah. So that is where I want to try and get our board to.
Yeah. So I think for those who are abiding to the three lines of defense, I think great what I'm hearing here, great organizational construct, but not great when you apply it as silos and everybody with their own risk assessment. So pursuit of the truth that should be self-evident to everybody is really key here. So moving ahead here, what made you consider adopting a model like FAIR as part of your cyber risk management strategy? So this is the FAIR conference. We are the authors of this dominant standard in the industry. So what made you consider that? Because I'm sure that at the beginning, just, I love it, just cut and paste, and the problem has a lot of debate. There's a lot of companies, there's a lot of model validations. People, they need to check things and before believing. What was the thinking, the rationale? Because we have here people starting the journey and wanting to go back to the bosses and explaining why they should do this. And maybe you guys can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I can maybe take that one first. I mean, for us, it was really the intrinsic capability of FAIR, of being able to compare things that are usually not compared. Like, as part of our business processes, we have manufacturing, so operating technology, e-commerce, physical boutiques like the shops and stuff like that, a lot of different stuffs. The only way of being able to present and report about all of our value chain risks was FAIR, in fact. And as a second line of defense, it is even more interesting because we are in the position of the people who know how the method works, and we are just gathering the data from the specialists, and we are not putting any bias into it, right? And this is really the strength of FAIR, and that's why we have adopted it, I guess, some years ago.
So basically, transparency was a big value for you guys, transparency in
of course.
The model. Okay.
Yeah.
I think for us or for me, I was reading books like Against the Gods and How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk, and I was reading Against the Gods as just people in the 13th century were doing things better than we were doing today, and I was like, how did this even happen? And we must be able to do something better. So we did some exploratory work, and then what really helped with FAIR was having an institute with a methodology behind it. It wasn't just me with a spreadsheet going, this is how it works. It was actually, this is the framework of FAIR, and there's calculations and publications around it that can stand on their own.
Yeah. So, and I'm happy to hear it, because when we started in 2016, there was a debate whether this was an art or a science, and we turned it into more a science. The fact that you're, valuing one having a scientific construct and a transparent one is it's great to see that you're adopting as a standard. And it's interesting in the industry. I was reading the stats this week from Gartner. They're saying that 50% of the Fortune 1000 are considering adopting risk assessment methodologies like FAIR within the next couple of years, which is a big number, because it used to be fraction, the visionaries, 5-10%, and some of you were in the category, but now it's like half the major companies have come to realize we need a more scientific way to help us make decisions and prioritize what matters to change the economics we talked before. So very interesting. It was very interesting to read that. So what I want to move now to the adoption part. We talked about the why we want to do this, why a model like FAIR might be useful, but let's talk about the challenge you may be facing, because a lot of people here may want to build a program. And you have a status quo, you want to be the change maker, and so what have you encountered as the biggest challenge in incorporating cyber risk proactively as part of business planning, and how you're trying to overcome it, or how did you succeed if you did? You know. Anybody wants to give it a try?
Well, I'm quite early in my journey, although I've done it in other organisations, but I can go through a few things, but it'd be good to get your views on this as well. I think the first question is, what is risk? I know that sounds really simple, but a lot of people think that risk is a lack of control. So just getting those basics nailed is quite important. And actually, what is opportunity? Because I think we step over that. And this is to your point in your presentation, right? It's a business issue. So you're always trading off risk and opportunity. If you're not having that conversation as a risk professional, you're not relevant. So I think if you sort of define those two things, you're at the table with the P&L owner of the product, right? And then I think it's about trying to talk to them in a way that they understand, with some sort of taxonomy they sort of can speak to against their customers or products. And then it's about developing some form of data that they can work with to support their decision making. And I think we're at that part of the journey. We've got a sort of a language we can speak. We're trying to gather the essential data elements, and now we need an MVP so they can start to see the value. But from you guys, it'd be good to sort of hear your experiences as well.
I think you're right. The language is really important. You know, you talk about the not actually SARDIS, but the difference between ops and risk or something like that, and that language sometimes, you know, everything's a risk from ops. Yeah. You're like, well, it isn't really. It's a vulnerability, or it's an issue, and it's already occurred, and so some of those are quite hard to get through or get across. I think on the other side, on the business side, I think it's about gaining credibility. So it's finding the challenge to take forward as your first go or your first view. What are you going to succeed with? Finding people that are open to the different ideas and different thoughts to give you that validation that this is right. And I think once you've done that, we certainly found the demand just increased because people were like, wow, we understand this now, right? I should be spending this money because, wow, I didn't realize that was, you know, to your point about ransomware with your organization, it's going to cost me this much money if it goes wrong. Or equally, and I think some of the other challenge we have being a cyber risk function with our cyber operations teams is sometimes our analysis tells us we don't need to spend the money. And that can be quite hard for an operational team following a framework like NIST or trying to become more mature, and we can be like, well, actually, it doesn't add up. The money you want to spend on a tool or something doesn't, you need to find a cheaper control to do that with.
That's good. Yeah. I think coming back to your point, from my perspective, the most difficult thing is to gain and keep credibility, especially with executives when you are presenting this kind of results. I think at some point, and we've made some mistakes, right, in our journey, like assuming that some data or some information is the right one without properly, or at least without finding the right business stakeholder who could answer the question and back us in case we are challenged, right? So I would say gaining and keeping credibility from executives is very important. And for this, in every assessment, every reporting, you need to find the right stakeholders that will be with you in this journey to defend your results. That's very important.
No, I love it. It seems like journey starts with a change of mindset, start with a change education, basically what is risk, what is not risk, and then as both of you pointed out, as coming up with initial results that are challenging the status quo, the current mentality is compliance-based, and being able to back it up so that we can stand firm, you know, on the results, or correct them if we get better data, and so they can lean on future analysis of knowing that it's going to be well thought through.
I think that bit about being open to, you know, adjusting the model with better results is really important. And I think certainly we've had some interesting conversations where, you know, we'll sit down and go, you know, we've done our modeling with FAIR, and, you know, the risk is, I don't know, 6 million ALE or something like that. And the stakeholder's like, oh, this can't be like that. How did you work this out? And we go, well, with the data we had, to your point, the experts we had access to, this is what we came up with our assumptions. And they're like, oh, we'll find some more informed people for you to work with. And then sometimes we come back and it's even higher. And they're like, oh, we thought it would be lower because our experts. But it helps that conversation and opens the doors and forces people to share information that perhaps you didn't have access to before.
Absolutely. One of the things I like about FAIR is that it really uncovers the assumptions you're making in completing an analysis. It's a bit like business planning. Business planning is the same thing. No budget gets approved on first pass. You come up with a projection, the business looks at it challenges the assumptions. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We make some fine-tuning, we'll look at multiple scenarios, and then we sort of define what we believe collectively is the best thing. If we don't, and based on the data we have, but driving the discussion, making the assumptions transparent is, I think, part of the value that in adopting FAIR. So, no, thank you for, giving us a sight into how the thinking goes on a day-to-day basis. Why don't we project ourselves in the future? What does the future of cyber risk management look like in your companies, We talked about how you started, what the present looks like, what kind of decisions you're facilitating, but how about the future? Where do you think this is going, and what are you aspiring to do?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it's probably quite far out there, but not very much interaction from an engineer or a service operations person with risk, to be honest with you. It's in their mindset for a start. We've brought them in, but we've taken away a lot of the toil or dredge, because we've orchestrated a lot of the decision making in our infrastructure, in our processes, and even in maybe the way that we share information with each other. But to do that, we need a good data model. We need to be able to agree between the ecosystems, how we manage risk collectively, because I don't think it's an individual organizational problem. And then we can put processes in place to help people accelerate the decision making. So that's where I ultimately would love to go. And then other than that, I think it's about predicting. So as opposed to reacting and being proactive, it's about moving beyond that. As things happen in the environment from a business or threat perspective, we see those issues before it even hits the customer, and we've taken the ability for someone to exploit a particular vulnerability before it even hits the market. We can't have that power unless we can model our organizations and then get the data to be able to make those sort of predictions. And I think it's going to be powered by risk quantification, but also agentic AI. I think agentic AI will really give us a lot of power to go and collect information, but also orchestrate the actions off the back of that information. So I think that will be also the next step change.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's cool. I think for us, two strands. I think the first is, and we touched on this the other day, Pierre, was around integrating better with the other risk functions. If I talk to some of our business stakeholders, they're like, great, I love your cyber risk assessment, but it's totally different to my financial one and my physical one and my other, and it's like, can't you all just use the same language and colors and whatever it might be? So I think there's a lot of work to do there, because particularly in cyber as well, a lot of cyber risk has aspects of physical security and it has financial impacts. So actually it is integrated, and we could work better rather than being totally disparate functions as often we are today. I think secondly, I like your bit about looking forward into the future, and I think there's things we don't do enough. First of all, ironically, is we don't do enough looking back. We'll do a risk assessment 2 years ago that says, there's a chance of this happening in the next 2 years, and it hasn't.
Yeah.
So we should go back and change that assessment and go, well, actually, it didn't happen in 2 years. Why was that? Was it because we were good or lucky, or do we need to change the model? Are our risk assessments we're doing today also false because they're saying it's going to happen in 2 years and it isn't? So we need to learn from that. And then looking forward, looking at I suppose, trial and error modeling better. Well, if I did this control, what would happen? If I did this other control, what would happen? So you can really sort of try in real time and see the effects of your actions.
All right.
Yeah, I think I agree with what was said before. From my perspective, FAIR can go well beyond cyber risk. That's how I see it. We could even think about enterprise risk management. On our side, we do risk scenarios for physical security, for different processes than ours with FAIR, and it works. And if you think about a board report, right, with the financial risks on one side, like credit risk, treasury risk, trading risk, there is a figure a threshold, a comment, and this is very clear, right? And then you look at the right part of the slide, the non-financial risk, op risk, business continuity, operating technology, stuff like that, and then it's not that clear, right? There are colors, comments everywhere, and I'm pretty sure FAIR can help having the same clarity on both sides of this slide. That's where
I love it. Bring cyber risk to be treated as an economical risk like any other risk function. That's a goal, I think, for the future for some of them. I also like the proactive nature of things because what we learned through the experience of the community is that you're going to have to spend money anyway. But the cost of reacting to an incident and doing this assessment afterwards and making sure it doesn't happen again is higher than if you're being proactive and help avoid the incident in the first place. So you're going to have to pay either way, but you're going to pay more if you're acting reactively. So I love the proactive view on things. I want to open the floor for possible questions. See if the audience wants to ask a question to our panelists. They're going to be available also in the breaks afterwards. Of course, you can tap into the experience. But I want to see if there's any questions you have you want to ask them.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Just from RealPen. Nick, you have kind of covered this in the questioning so far, but a little bit more specifically to the panel members, if you were in an organization where you're about to embark on your cyber risk quantification program and the FAIR methodology, what would be your kind of top advice? And I need to be careful with my CISO, but in theory, let's say it's an organization who hasn't potentially got a grasp of their current risk landscape through traditional means like qualitative risk assessment. So what's kind of your high level 1 to 3 year plan? What's your kind of high level goals when you're about to roll out?
You mean, is it like, okay, so when you're about to start something and you want to find a way to crack it, right? Okay, like if I have just one thing to say is that I would try to find what are the most important concerns of my business stakeholders, my CISO as well as he's here, but most importantly from my perspective, the business stakeholders, to look at the data you have that are already existing, and then just to go for it. And if you have questions, like the FAIR Institute is like a family, you know, you can reach out to us and we'll answer and we'll try to support you as much as we can. But like find the concerns of the executives of the business, find the data you have which could answer those concerns, or find a way to use cyber risk quantification to answer those concerns. That would be like something.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's all about the questions that the executive ask that we try and answer, and saying how can we do that a bit better. Because I think you made the point that you've got a subjective assessment today with people leaning into those answers, and we want to make it more objective and more continuous, to your point. And so when you sort of have that conversation with them, of course they're going to say, yes, I'd like that. And then you need to sort of give them something quickly that demonstrates the value of a quantitative assessment. And it could be anything, right? It could be a simple assessment of budget for cybersecurity strategy, potentially, if the CISO supports it. It could be, hey, loads more third parties are coming on. Which ones are risky and which ones are less risky? It could be something to do with ICAP, if you do ICAP returns of financial services. It could be writing cyber insurance. We've got the right premium in place. So I think about the initial conversation with the executive, to your point, answering their questions a bit better, and which is the most relevant use case for you right now that you could go and show value against.
I think definitely that. Picking one example to work on, and maybe it's a small example, and proving the point, or experimenting. I mean, use the words experiment. Hey, that's a great question. We want to experiment with our new idea, and we'll come back in 4 weeks or something with something. Be great. Rather than promising an amazing thing that's going to happen, because when you tend to promise things, people's expectations go way up. I think I tend to be more deferential around.
Yeah. And maybe to finish on that, there is a high likelihood that someone in the room has already faced the same issue and can support
definitely
as well.
I love it. And again, pick up a business problem that in summary here, that the business cares about, and don't just geek out on FAIR or CRQ, solve their problem, become indispensable, Last question, I think Tim here had a question, yes. Do you have a mic for Tim?
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Tim Carter, Lloyds Banking Group. So my question is for Neil and Pierre, and I think I recall seeing you both speak at the conference 2 years ago. So for me, you both seem like seasoned CRQ professionals, well on the journey from others in the room. And my question, which sort of links to the word you used, Pierre, about family, how have you leveraged the FAIR community in your journey, and where has that helped the most?
Okay, so for this one, this is very easy because Todd here is, let's say, the guy making the link between all of us. I have the chance to be part of some committees already, but I would say it's more like the relationship that you have that we can start today and keep across the time. Just one example, but a few months ago we had an issue with a third party. Okay, and I had no idea about how to handle it, which scenario would apply to me, and I had to answer fast. Mm-hmm. So I just called someone from the network, and as well a member of the FAIR Institute. We discussed. He had in fact this same third party in its portfolio, and he explained to me how he handled this. So I would say it's just a question of staying connected. That's just how it works, I guess.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you. I think that that's one of the benefits of the community. When I ask people, what is the biggest value you get out of the community? It's like being able to journey together with others. And I've been surprised over the years, as the founder of the Institute, how collaborative the Institute is, even between companies in the same industry. Typically competitors don't share much, but here we're facing the same battle.
Of course.
And so let's help one another be stronger and learn faster by sharing of the best practices. And that's what we're going to do on stage here, we're going to do during the breaks, in our local chapters. At other events, he'll speak about the ways to stay connected in the future, but it's one of the main values of the FAIR Institute. So thank you for the question. I think we're at time. I really enjoyed the conversation. As a family, we want to continue. It's almost like we are around a fire and continue, but we can continue in the breaks. I want to give a big thank you and round of applause to our panelists here. So.